We're going to read verses 11 through the end of the chapter. Somebody want to read that or read part of that?
And he said, a certain man had 2 sons, and the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the portion of goods that belonged to me, and he divided unto them his living. And not many days after, the younger son gathered all together and took his journey into a far country, and there wasted his substance by his living. And when he had spent all, there arose a mighty famine in the land, and he began to be in want. And he went and joined himself to a citizen of that country, and he sent him into his fields to feed swine. And he would fain have filled his belly with the husk that the swine did eat, and no man gave unto him. And when he came to himself, he said, How many hired servants of my father's have bread enough to spare, and I perish with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and will say unto him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before thee, and am no more worthy to be called thy son. Make me as one of thy hired servants. And he arose and came to his father. But when he was yet a great way off, his father saw him and had compassion, and ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. And the son said unto his father, I have sinned against heaven and in thy sight, and am no more worthy to be called thy son. But the father said unto his servants, Bring forth the best robe, and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand, and shoes on his feet, and bring hither the fatted calf, and kill it, and let us eat and be merry. For this my son was dead, and is alive again, and he was lost, and is found. And they began to be merry. Now his elder son was in the field, and as he came and drew nigh to the house, he heard music and dancing. And he called one of the servants, and asked what these things meant. And he said unto him, Thy brother is come, and thy father hath killed the fatted calf, because he hath received him safe and sound. And he was angry, and would not go in. Therefore came his father out and entreated him. And he answering said to his father, Lo, these many years do I serve thee, neither transgressed I at any time thy commandment, and yet thou never gavest me a kid, that I might make merry with my friends. But as soon as this thy son was come, which hath devoured thy living with harlots, thou hast killed for him the fatted calf. And he said unto him, Son, thou art ever with me, and all that I have is thine. It was meet that we should make merry and be glad, for this thy brother was dead and is alive again, and was lost and is found.
All right. It's probably a heard story. All right, in this parable, in verse 12, what did the father ask? What did the son ask the father?
For his inheritance.
He wanted his portion, right? Does that normally happen? Would that normally happen? No. Kind of odd for somebody to want their inheritance before their father or family passed on, because that's usually when you get it, if you're going to get it. And for a person to come up and ask that is pretty selfish, self-centered. But if you're looking at it from a spiritual standpoint, what is it? Or what's it likened to? What's it like?
Taking accountability.
Taking accountability.
Ahead of when you're gonna, to show like you want it, you're gonna take care of it instead of I'm just gonna throw it away. Prove something like this.
Later on.
Okay.
You got the right idea. Is the overall theme, but up front, it's like somebody leaving. Sinner, when you sin, you leave the church, you depart from God, you're going away. And this son comes up and he wants his inheritance right now. And then in verse, I hate my scribble, 13, what do we see this son does in 13?
They wasted it.
He gathered and he left, right? So he's departing.
He distanced himself from all the people that would have helped him be faithful and true and remember what he's supposed to learn. And, but he also, not only did he squander the wealth, he squandered his own reputation. He had a good reputation with his family. And when he did this, he threw that away. And that's a very valuable thing. A very difficult thing to get back if you lose it.
That's all you really have, right?
Yeah.
At the end of the day, if you don't have anything else, that's all you really have. We see where Jesus is saying he left, he went away. When a sinner, well, I'll start with this side. When a person leaves wherever he's at, so he's wanting to get away from his family. And this guy went as far away as possible. He wanted to get away from everybody that either knew him or been around him or associated with him. And he left all that altogether. Like you said, he left his support system, per se. On the spiritual side, he's departing. It would be like us departing God. We're going to go away from him. And when we slide away or we go out and do our own will, basically, where can that lead us? Or where does it lead us? They can lead us away, right? Dark. It gets you out of the things you shouldn't be doing anyway. It'll, and, let's make sure I'm not ahead of myself. That's wrong. There may be the right one. No, that's wrong. Too many papers on my space. I need to do something about this big. I don't have it, but he gets up there and he's got this little thing that's all pretty nice and I look like a slow. But I can't, it's, yeah. I can't help it. He went out and he was in a big hurry. I mean, most kids, if they leave home and decide that they don't want to listen to mom and dad anymore, either they want to get out of here. I'm assuming that's why Taylor went through to Tennessee. She wanted to be as far away from me as she possibly could, at least distance-wise. I can't bug her every day. But, generally, a child wants to be out on their own. They want to do their own thing. But there's ways we need to pay attention to the things that we're doing to make sure that we still stay in line. The guy did whatever he wanted to do. What did his father do about it? What did he do?
Let him have it.
He let him do whatever he wanted, right? He just said, here you go, and the kid left. What's God do with us? Does he always, he lets us go and do whatever we want, right? God's given us the opportunity, if we want to take it, to either follow him or go out and do whatever I want. And there was no persuasion on the father's part here to hold him at home. Just the same way that God.
Was there no reason gave to, was there need for him to leave?
No, it wasn't like he was being forced out or a problem like that. There's no indication that, ill-treated or, there's a reason for him to leave. He left on his own free will, just as the same thing that God does for us today. All right?
You could look at the wanting the inheritance, you could look at that, I guess, in a sense of wanting the physical treasures and blessings of this earth now instead of waiting for the spiritual, which is to come. And when he squandered them, away, he was losing his spiritual inheritance in a sense because of what he was doing.
We lose all, for the most part, a human being is immediate gratification. Whatever I can get now to have, it'll make me think that I'm doing better. And we see this with this guy as we go on here, of what he's doing. with what he's got. All right?
If you look at this kind of from the standpoint of someone that's in the church, you know, God's blessed all of us. And sometimes people get too comfortable with and less dependent on God. And so they can say, well, I really don't need God that much. And that's kind of what he's saying. I don't need you, Dad. You know, just give me my share, or my bless that you're gonna bless me with. And then it was later on when he decided to leave. So, but there's people I've seen, you know, were strong in the faith, and then life got the best of them, or they got successful, or whatever the case, or things were going so well that, you know, they didn't need God, and so they slip away. And that's why I guess I'm thinking that's some of the wealth is what God has blessed us with. I mean, just He's blessing us all the time, and what we do with that, how we use it to our advantage or disadvantage is up to us. He's not going to say, well, you can't do that. I'm going to take the blessing away. You know, it's still given that way. So, but that's what we have to be careful for, not to, because he kind of like, Dad, I don't need you anymore. You know, I want to do my own thing. It's disturbing the entitlement attitude he had. It's like, give me what's mine. Well, it's only because his father said, I'm generous enough to give it to you. So.
It's part of liken it to like a challenge that we have is what you do with things that you've got to make sure you've done it the right way versus I've got all this and you know the several parables ahead of us, you know, what I do with what I've got. And then am I doing it the right way? Am I using everything I've got given to me? And then like you said, the entitlement aspect, you know, what I have is mine and I want more. But then again, I'm not necessarily going to use it because I don't think God helped me with it. A lot of times I think we do all this by ourselves, and I just don't think that's an accurate description of what happened. God's blessed us with things, even though we may or may not think we've made it ourselves. Type of an attitude.
I think, I may be wrong, probably. The division wouldn't have been equal. Because the older son would have got twice as much, right?
Mhm.
You'd only get a smaller portion than the other son. So the father might have thought, well, he wants to get started on his own, and here I'll let him have it and heal. And then he went and decided to blow it.
That's what we're going to ask next. Is, what did the son do with his money? He wasted it all. 13. And not many days after, the son gathered all together, journeyed to a far country, and there wasted his possessions with prodigal living. So went out and had a good time. How much? Let's see how I word it. How many friends will money buy you? Let's go that. That's a good question to ask.
As many as you can afford.
As many as you can afford, right? As long as you got money, you're gonna have friends.
Money runs out.
When the money runs out,
Yeah. Go
uh,
on.
what does prodigal mean? Prodigal?
Basically, riotous.
Practice, wasteful.
Wasteful.
He's not using the things that he's got.
You
way
know,
we should.
and you can understand why the other son was upset. I mean, that's perfectly understandable. You know, he stayed and devoted himself to his father, and then this guy just walks in and hip hip hooray. And it's understandable why the other son would have those feelings.
With his prodigal living, the way this guy went out, he just spent all his money, wasted it all on the parties, well, basically anything and everything that the world gives you. But it values as highly valuable where God does not.
He didn't anticipate hard times that was coming. A lot of times you don't look ahead that, oh, there's a severe famine could happen, or I could fall on hard times, you know. You don't think about that.
Well, and to me, if you look at it,
I might have President Biden as my president. Inflation,
everything comes along with it. Let's go on the right one. Back to deal with, that's the fun part. On this, I had on the tongue ripped from my mouth right before I said it. Prodigal living, wasteful, we're doing whatever, I'm gonna just use me. I'm doing whatever makes Andy feel good. Whatever Andy thinks is great, whatever the world thinks is highly valuable. Now, I've got all this money. If I haven't invested in the land, animals, something that's gonna make me money, how long does money last if you're going through $100 bills like the $1 bills? Doesn't take very long before you have the money, right? If I had to sit here for a second. If I keep spending it like that without having a savings account, I'm not gonna have the ability to withstand a hard time or a problem coming. And that's kind of how this guy is shown. So if we go and waste everything we have, and we're not justifying or using it the way we should, we're gonna run out of time.
Well, it's interesting. I like to look at the opposite of the word sometimes. So the opposite of this word is a sound mind, moderate, sober, and with restraint. So he had no restraint. He was not moderate in his spending. And so that's, it's talking about he's had no thought, kind of what Kathy was saying, no thought to the future, no thought to what he needed to do. He would just throw it out the door.
Well, how can we be prodigal with our time and our abilities also? Where do we spend all our time? We can waste our time. We can just be lounging around and, doing nothing all the time and waste our time, our abilities, things we're capable of doing, right? We could waste that. All right. I had rashness or your reckless, extravagant spending, having all the best of everything, having just basically wild your spending spree. Basically, just to have it look like you're doing better than you really are. All right.
What it represents is the fact that, think about this as a person was in the church in a sense. That's what it's talking, the kingdom. And then has left, went into that far country outside of the church. And then they're not thinking about what their actions, what they're doing, how they're affecting them. So, yeah, that's.
They're just out there. They don't really recognize the fact that they fall away and left at that point. Because here in just a second, we're going to see what happens when he comes to himself.
But it's a picture of what should happen to someone that has left the church.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the whole parable is covering that. It's going from the moment one's lost, or is headed that way, to lost, to recognition, and then repentance and returning throughout the whole parable. What happened to him in verse 21? We're not going to get that far. Verse 14, we're seeing that there's a famine in the land. And God, Kathy said, you don't really forecast that out and recognize that.
He turned around, he had repentance, and he was ready to prepare.
Well, in verse 15, he had to be a citizen of that country and to work just to get by. And he was barely even doing that. What was one of the things the Jews held very little esteem or didn't really care for?
Pigs.
Pigs.
This is the lowest of jobs. Jews out there feeding pigs.
That's the thing, that's what I wrote down, was little, so you hit it on the nail on the head there, is the Jews, swine was an unclean animal. It was something, they wouldn't even say the word, they'd say something else. And they didn't want to have anything to do with it. I mean, it was the bad of the bad. And here this guy is, he's fallen low enough. He ran out of money, which in turn he ran out of friends. You run out of money and your friends, and now you're stuck out here in a world that nobody cares about you. So now you're stuck. Feeding pigs, basically.
And the pigs are eating better than he is.
And the pigs were eating better than he was. It's kind of interesting, what happens if you hit the bottom and or you don't even have food. You're getting down there pretty low to where you're gonna have to decide to do something else.
I think there before, the pigs better than I eat, I go eat bologna.
I'd rather eat the pig than the bologna. I had bacon this morning. I don't like it. But the Jews do not. All right. He hit something, or hit basically rock bottom. He bottomed out. He came to a point that there is no more money, no more friends. I've got a job that I don't like, doing something I really don't care for. I'd rather be eating what the pigs are eating than eating nothing. What comes about, what does he, what finally, I guess, clicks in his head? Verse 17.
When he came to his senses, which obviously means he was not in his right mind during this whole time. I mean, seriously, it's kind of like, duh, light came on. How stupid can I be? Is kind of the way he said.
He got to the point where he recognized that he'd done something wrong, correct? He come to the realization that, hey, maybe I am not looking at the things I need to look at in a way I need to look at them. I need to respect the fact that I've had an opportunity and I squandered it. What do I do to fix that? Or, how do I go about making it right? And I think that's where he was at in verse 17 then. All right. Spiritually speaking, that would be when?
When he realized he'd sinned.
When he realized he sinned. He realized that he had a fault and that he'd sinned and he'd done things the wrong way. What do you do after this? Verse 18.
At home,
He went back home, right?
And he admitted that he sinned. I mean, yeah.
He admitted that he'd done it the wrong way. And you notice in 17 that he says this before he even goes. When he came to himself, he said, how many of my father's servants have bread enough to spare, and I perish with hunger? His recognition that, he had it better at home than he has it here. We've got better in the church than they've got it out in the world. The blessings and things that we receive, even though we might see the world receiving it, I guess from a farming standpoint, I get rain, everybody gets rain, really, at the end of the day. So even those outside the church get that blessing. But God gives us the things that we need So, we have something to be thankful for. We depart from that, maybe not recognizing everything that we do get, and decide that we want to do it ourselves, we will come to the recognition that, hey, I messed up. Verse 18, now arise again, my father, and will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. And that's where he's coming to the realization that, hey, I sinned. But he's making this decision of what I need to do before he does it. He's recognizing that he was the problem, basically. Or he created his own problem. All right. What do we see in 15, verse 20 there, sorry?
Forgiveness.
Forgiveness. What else do we notice?
Even when he was afar off. So he's still out there, the Father saw him and helped him or had compassion.
That's what I was looking for. But who was looking? His father. His father never gave up on him, right? He was always out watching for him. He did go out watching. It wasn't something that, he didn't hold him at home. He didn't make him stay, but he's always watching. What's God doing today?
Watching for us.
He's watching. He's looking for the sinners that, okay, they've come to recognition that they're doing something wrong, they're gonna come back home. It's representing that, I don't want to love for those that are lost, I think is pretty good wording for it. Just because somebody left, does that mean that they can't come back at all?
He still loves them. He still has compassion for them. And it's up to them whether they want to be allowed to be loved or not, It's really all up to us. God doesn't change. He isn't going to give up on us. He's always there no matter how bad it is. Which is a hard thing for me to really understand. That kind of love that God has. He just won't give up. And we do give up on ourselves and other people. And God is always there waiting.
Well, that made me think this morning as I was going over this, that I hadn't really thought about from the father's perspective before on how he didn't quit watching. He didn't quit waiting. I'd read it, but it didn't click on that side. I understood that the younger son leaving and the older son being mad. The father, I guess to me, I just looked at him like that, like a father. He's just waiting. Okay, everything's fine. But to actually be out watching and waiting, and I'll get into it more as we go through the older son. But he never gave up on the younger son coming back. All right. What the father gave the son who came home, verse 22 through 23.
A robe, and a ring, shoes, and the fatted calf.
Okay. What the robe and the ring and the shoes represent?
Well, that he wasn't a slave or a servant, which is what he asked his father to make him as if he was not. He didn't think he was worthy enough to be called a son anymore. But his father recognized him still as part of the family.
He restored him back to his place. The son coming home with the right mental state, the fact that, hey, I've basically wasted everything that you give me. I'll come back home, work for wages, or just work to survive, basically. Because in the faraway country, he realized that his father's servants were fed, housed. They had everything, all the needs that they needed covered. And he recognized this. So really, all he was set to do or set to go back to was just to be that servant. He didn't really want, he didn't expect to be raised back up to this level. But yet the father bringing him home, giving back the respect, the honor, the robe wasn't just brought out for anybody. It was the sign of authority, sign he's got something to come back to. And then the slaves, like you said, they didn't have shoes. Those people that were of the household or whatever were the ones with the shoes. The signet ring was a way they signed things. And then the fatted calf, visitors or guests, highly, kind of like a respect type thing as people come in. But how should we be towards those that come back?
Welcome.
Welcoming. You know, we shouldn't, this father-son, picture, I guess, I'm gonna say snapshot, just right now, boom, that's all you get, that's all you get, right there, is he had love for his son as he came home. God has love for the sinners that return and repent. So as you come back, why wouldn't you be happy? You know, God rejoices at everyone that returns. This man, as shown in this man rejoicing as his son comes home, he was lost and is found. You know, or no better purpose, was he dead? Really? As he went out in the world with his family, he just left it all behind him and went away. He was dead. I mean, at that time they didn't have a smartphone, so you can't see where everybody's moving around or nobody's posting something. If you take all that away from it, do you know what anybody else is doing outside? If it wasn't for any social media or anything we have today, you don't know what anybody else is doing. They could be dead for all you know. And he just came back to them alive and well.
I think it's a sign that he was accepted. And if he was accepted by his own family, then that means he was going to be accepted by everyone else. Because if they didn't do those things for him, then everybody else is going to be like, okay, maybe we shouldn't do that.
Well, there's a lot of that mentality here in a second. We're gonna see what happens when they don't. But yeah, it definitely is something that we should, as Kathy said, you know, it should be something that you bring in. He's respected, he's seen that, and back to normal. I guess you wouldn't want to not include them, basically. You know, you're just not putting them away. Or maybe bringing them in, but not really, you know, you're kind of eyeballing or whatever. I guess is kind of where I'm going to word it. Your respect isn't totally there.
You know, he lost that entitlement mentality, and he was humble, and his father exalted him. And that's what it says God will do to us if we humble ourselves before him. He will lift us up, exalt us. And he didn't ask to be exalted. He says, "Hey, I'll be one of your servants." And so he humbled himself, and his father was able to raise him back up and restore him to his place in the family.
A lot of times, trials or things that come along humble us, make us stop and think about, you know, how important am I? How highly valued am I? You know, in our own eyes, how highly valuable are we? I mean, from a personal standpoint, you know, you're like, well, I'm valuable, you know, I'm capable of doing this or that or the other. But if the ego takes over and I value myself too much or think I'm too high and mighty to go do the little jobs, you know, we're brought back down occasionally and said, hey, you know, you might think you're really good, but God has given you these abilities to use. And if you're not using them the way you should be using them, they can be taken away.
Well, there's several examples of that kind of return. David, when he had sinned with Bathsheba, you know, Psalm 51, it was a very repentant, humbling moment for him to say, I've done this, please, you know, forgive me, basically. I mean, paraphrasing. And then, so I mean, but that's what's supposed to happen. It's 1 Corinthians 5, verse 5. Talks about the brother that was sinning and they were accepting him. Paul said you're supposed to cast him to Satan for the destruction of the flesh, so that his spirit saved him in the last day. Reach that bottom and then come out. humbling realization.
It makes us stop and think, or should. And then as it's shown through here, the younger son hit that. He hit the, hey, I've done something wrong, I need to go fix this and come back.
But with that example of 1 Corinthians, we have a perfect example of they didn't want to cast him out, like Paul said, and then he had to write in 2 Corinthians to tell them that they needed to accept him back because he did repent. So, 2 Corinthians 2.
As we see through there, it's a parallel to what we're, what Christ uses as a parable actually happens. And that's shown through that and shown how we should be towards those. All right? Any other comments for the morning? That'll have been a little topic. All right, verse 24, or not 24, sorry. What's under from there on? Lost my slide on. Verse 25. Now the older son was in the field, and as he came and drew near the house, he heard music and dancing, so he called one of the servants and asked what these things meant. And he said to him, your brother has come, and because he has received him safe and sound, your father has killed the fatted calf. But he was angry and would not go in. Therefore his father came out and pleaded with him. What do we notice of the older son here?
He's very upset.
He's very upset, right? And if you look at it from a worldly standpoint or whatnot, are you mad if somebody's having a party and either you think you weren't invited or you don't think the person's worthy of it? So that's a little bit of what this guy's got going on. He's mad because his brother came back and they're having a party for him, even though he knows how his brother was as he left. You can kind of see the frustration, the anger there, because he's been here the whole time as we'll read on. But he'd been out in the field working, right? He was out basically working for his father. It wasn't him at that. I mean, he was for himself at that time, but it wasn't for himself. I guess we'll drop back. Let's read Deuteronomy. Somebody want to read Deuteronomy 21:17, please? We'll hit that real quick.
21:17.
21:17.
But he shall acknowledge the son of the unloved wife as the firstborn by giving him a double portion of all that he has. For he is the beginning of his strength. The right of the firstborn is his.
Okay. So everything the older son had was a double portion of whatever the father had. So the younger son only took a single, well, basically a third. If there's only two of them. He pulled a third, the older son still has the 2/3. So in reality, he's working for himself at this point because his brother's already pulled off there. So to look down at that or think that that's a bad thing, he's not looking at it the correct way. It should be the fact that yes, his brother did come back, but he's not. All right. I think that's finger marks, these things. Little words. So he answered and said to his father, "Oh, these many years I have been serving you. I never transgressed your commandment at any time, and yet you never gave me a young goat that I might make merry with my friends. But as soon as this son of yours came, who has devoured your livelihood, harlots, and killed the fat, you killed the fatted calf for him." And he said to him, "Son, you're always with me, and all that I have is yours. It was right that we should make merry and be glad, for your brother was dead and is alive again, and was lost and is found." The son knew how his brother was, didn't want to have any part of it. But what's that represent as far as at the time of Jesus giving him his parable? I got a question nobody can answer. I'll let you study that.
That's a way to leave it.
I get one good wording in once every 10 or 15 years.
Write that question down so I don't forget.
I'll probably forget it before you do.
That older son kind of reminds me of Mary and Martha, where Martha, or one of them, I think it was Mary, was doing all the work and Martha was listening to Jesus, and she was mad because she was working. And then it kind of reminds me, not that it is the same, but it kind of reminds me of that whole.
How it came apart. Thank you for your comment.